Okay, Nikolai, I think we can start. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christopher Buttigieg. I'm the Chief Officer Supervision of the Malta Financial Services Authority. I'm also the chair of the Data Standing Committee. I hope you had a nice and relaxing summer. Work at ESMA has continued as always. I'm joined by Nikolai and Joanna, who have done a lot of work on the EMIR project. As you are aware, EMIR Refit was published in May 2019, and since then ESMA hasn't stopped working on developing technical standards and also guidelines. The technical standards are with the European Commission. They were submitted way back in December last year. Through the technical standards and the guidelines, what we're trying to do is align with international standards, therefore the CPMI IOSCO standards, including the standards on unique transaction identifier and unique product identifier. We're also trying to achieve end-to-end reporting in terms of ISO standards relating to XML. We're also trying to enhance and harmonize across the TR data quality requirements. And we're also trying to standardize the process of data access with regards to the data that needs to be submitted in terms of EMIR. As you are aware, the world is moving towards more data-driven supervision, which ensures that we can, in a more effective way, adopt a risk-based approach to our work. So data quality and data harmonization are fundamental, and through this work, we are strengthening the harmonization of this area. In addition, we're also ensuring better data quality. Now, as I mentioned before, can you move the slides, please? Change slide again. Thank you very much. So, with a status update on the technical standards, as I mentioned before, the technical standards were provided to the European Commission way back in December of last year. In the meantime, we've been working very actively on the guidelines on reporting under EMIR Refit, and the consultation was issued way back in July. We are welcoming comments by the 30th September, and as part of this open hearing, we would like to hear where you require further clarifications before submitting your response. The guidelines, next slide please. The guidelines are split into 4 main sections. There's a section on general principles, which provides clarifications on different areas relating to submission of reports with respect to EMIR. There's also a section on reporting per product type, again providing further clarifications and examples on how reporting should be made. There are also tables of fields providing examples relating to reports. And finally, there's also a section on data management. We look forward to hearing from you, and I now leave you in the hands of Joanna and Nikolai, who will be taking you through the presentation and requesting for any comments, feedback, or clarifications that you require from us. Thank you very much. Joanna?
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone also from my side. Maybe if we could move to the next slide. Thanks. Yes, I will start with one of the topics that is actually also one of the first topics in the consultation paper on the guidelines, which is the transitional provisions. As mentioned already in the introduction, the draft technical standards introduce several new requirements aiming at improving the data usability and the data quality. such as new fields with new information that is valuable for the regulators, new standardized way of reporting such information, or reports in ISO 20022 from the counterparties to the TRs. So of course, all the derivatives, all the new reports, and by new reports I mean here the new derivatives concluded after the go-live of the revised technical standards, but also any modifications to the derivatives that will be outstanding at that date will need to be updated in line with the new requirements. What is also specified, and this is in the technical standards, is that the counterparties will need to update the outstanding derivatives not only when there will be a reportable event such as the modification or correction, but to ensure the good data quality in the long term, and considering that many derivatives have long outstanding maturities. Even if there is no such a specific reportable event, the counterparties will need to send a modification with action type specific event type update to make sure that in the very end all the derivatives will be in line with those new data quality expectations. Of course, this will constitute some effort for the reporting entities, so to account for that, and based on the consultation on the technical standards, and transitional period of 6 months has been envisaged. So this is the period within which all the derivatives will need to be updated. In terms of the guidelines, as we aim to provide there additional clarifications on some aspects. In particular, one detail, but rather important for the reporting entities, is that there is no expectations to regenerate UTIs for the derivatives that were concluded before the reporting start date, before the go-live of the new technical standards. So it is understood that this would be indeed a very onerous requirement for the reporting entities, and to account for that, the validation rules for the UTI can be made less strict for those derivatives that were concluded before, to make sure that UTIs that do not fully conform with the new for instance, format specifications still can be reported. Generally, we do expect that there will be just one set of schemas and validation rules for all the reports made after the go-live technical standards. So definitely this will be a big improvement in terms of the data quality. As mentioned before, given that there will be...
Asha, sorry, I have to interrupt you for a second. Some people are saying that they don't see slides on the screen. I see slides on the screen, so there are slides on the screen currently, which in this point in time, we're on point 3 of the agenda, which is about transitional provisions.
I do see slides as well, but what we can do going forward is to indicate the number of the agenda when we'll be moving between the slides, so that
exactly. Let's do that. And also sorry now that I have interrupted you, just to address two more one more aspect, then the other one, the go live, you are going to cover it after this. It is our intention that the slides support the discussion today, but we don't expect to share them with you. Basically, they transcribe the consultation paper, but we would not share the slides, as they are just for this to support this discussion today. Thank you. Sorry, Joanna.
No worries. So going back to this specific slide, as mentioned before, we do expect to have a single set of schemas and validation rules for the reporting to the TRs by the counterparties after the go-live. And this is because, as mentioned before, all the reports made after that date will need to comply with the new requirements. However, given that not all the derivatives will be, not all the outstanding derivatives will be updated on day one, we do expect that within the limits of the transition period, there will be some derivatives remaining that have not yet been updated. That's why, at least in that transition period, the schema for the trade state report, so the information that TRs provide to the authorities on the latest status of the outstanding derivatives, will need to be relaxed to accommodate also for the reports that were updated under the current, that were reported under the current technical standards and not yet updated. I'll just take a quick look at the questions sent within the chat. So there is one question on the go live date. As mentioned in the introduction, the draft technical standards have been submitted to the European Commission on 17 December last year. At this stage, they have not yet been endorsed, and we do not have yet visibility over the, do not have yet a clear timeline for the endorsement. But just to recall, as per the usual legislative process, after the endorsement by the European Commission, the technical standards will also undergo the non-objection period by the European Parliament and the Council. Once they are accepted and published in the official journal, as envisaged in the draft technical standards, the counterparties would have 18 months for implementation. So at this stage, we, as we can expect right now, we think that the call-with date could be around the second quarter of 2023. Of course, all this is subject to the progress in the endorsement process. Okay, I think this is as for the chat. Are there any other questions in relation to this slide before moving forward? Okay, I don't see any hands up, nor more questions in the chat, so I think, Federico, that we can move to the next slide. Oops, one more question. Is there the possibility of starting on with the reconciliation of new deals? Okay, I see this is more on the reconciliation, so if you allow us, we will leave this to the later point in the presentation, where we'll be speaking about the reconciliation. So on the next slide deals with the allocation of responsibility for reporting and delegation of reporting. As you may recall, the EMIR Refit introduces new provisions on allocation of responsibility for reporting in certain scenarios. In particular, when non-financial counterparty below the clearing threshold concludes an OTC trade with financial counterparty. The latter is solely responsible and legally liable for reporting on behalf of both. Nevertheless, the non-financial counterparty minus is still expected to provide to the financial counterparty some details of the derivative that the financial counterparty cannot be reasonably expected to possess. So this is in terms of level 1 provisions, a very quick recap. In the technical standards introduce certain arrangements that the counterparties should have in place to make sure that level 1 provisions can work in practice, and that reporting is done correctly and without duplications. So, for instance, arrangements on timely provision of relevant details of the derivatives by the NFC- to the financial counterparty, or informing timely by the financial counterparty when it changes the status from the NFC- to NFC+, or vice versa, or informing about opting out, because non-financial counterparties have also this possibility. So all these kind of arrangements. And in the guidelines, certain additional clarifications would be provided. So, for instance, in terms of the timely provision of information by NFC minus to the financial counterparty, there would be a possibility to agree on predefined values. For instance, if NFC minus always uses the same clearing member, it's not necessary and not really a preference from a regulator's perspective that such information is provided for each and every trade. So if the counterparties wish, they can agree on predefined value. Still, of course, the non-financial counterparty minus would need to inform the financial counterparty in case of any exception if at some point a clearing member is a different one. If there are derivatives that should have been reported by NFC minus before the new provisions under EMIR Refit became applicable, or for instance, if at some point in the past NFC minus was opting out, or if it was before a non-financial counterparty over the clearing threshold. So in such cases, counterparties will also need to ensure that the reports are done without duplication. In terms of outstanding derivatives, one important aspect, possible complication is when the two counterparties report to two different TRs. So the guidelines would also clarify how to proceed in this scenario. Certain clarifications are provided with respect to allocation of responsibility for reporting in the case of funds. To give an example, when a fund that is a financial counterparty trades with NFC minus, then the manager of the fund would be responsible for reporting on behalf of the fund and on behalf of the non-financial counterparty minus. And finally, abstracting from the new provisions under EMIR Refit, there are additional clarifications on the so-called voluntary delegation of reporting. So this is a possibility that counterparties have already since the beginning of reporting under EMIR to delegate the reporting to either to other counterparty or to a third entity, third party. But in this case, the difference is that it is the counterparty that still remains responsible for the quality of the reporting. Some additional clarifications would be provided in the guidelines, for instance, on the information on data quality that would need to be provided by the report submitting entity to the reporting counterparty or the entity responsible for reporting, the content of the delegation agreement, etc. I don't want to take too much time on the clarifications, so I would rather move to the questions. And let me see what was the first one. Is there any expectation that NFC minus are actively checking the reporting performed on their behalf by financial counterparties, given they are not legally responsible for it? There was mentioned in the consultation paper of financial counterparties providing regular updates to NFC minus, indeed, but it wasn't clear what NFC minus would do with this information other than store it for the record keeping requirement. So I think the answer could be twofold. On one hand side, as mentioned before, there are certain details of the derivative that financial counterparties are not expected to possess, such as could be broker of the non-financial counterparty minus. So, and these a couple of fields are mentioned in the technical standards. So, if there is a mistake in such these details, of course, then FC minus should verify if it has provided correct information to the financial counterparty, if not correct it. And if yes, anyway, it would be reasonable to flag this to the financial counterparty. In terms of other details, even if it's not the responsibility of the non-financial counterparty minus, so it would be the financial counterparty that is liable for the quality of reporting. Still, of course, NFC minus can reach out and would be probably the best way forward to flag such errors in reporting to the financial counterparty. So, as maybe one more general statement, as mentioned before, thanks also for flagging those little those additional aspects that might not be fully covered in the consultation paper. We will be taking note of them, but also please provide them in your feedback when providing your answers in writing to the consultation. Next question. The draft guidelines now state that NFC minus ELI status should be an issued state each time a derivative is concluded. Is it intentional that ELI does not need to be issued if a modification or correction needs to be reported? The status of the ELI of the counterparties needs to be the correct ones that it's issued. There are for different action types, the validation rules are slightly different. For instance, for determination, we may not prescribe the necessity to have status issued to make sure that derivatives can be duly terminated. But overall, yes, the expectation is that NFC minus duly updates its ELI, and this is also covered as part of the arrangements between the counterparties in the technical standards. I'm not sure if there is another question or not. It might be back on my side, but I see at least intent of question from Damiano Di Maio, but I cannot see here a question.
I think, Joanna, it was deleted probably. I cannot see it either, so let's move on.
Okay, I don't see. Should we consider correct OTC derivatives traded on ICE UK in the EMIR EU threshold, even if the competent authority recognize the equivalence per ICE?
This is not a question on reporting logic, I would say, right? This is question about clearing threshold. So we don't understand what it means correct OTC derivatives. So if your question is about whether those should be included in the computation of clearing thresholds, I suggest that you raise this question with ESMA and you would receive answer in due time.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, so let's move to the next topic, which is on the reporting of lifecycle events. The logic for reporting of lifecycle events has been improved and expanded in the revised technical standards. As you know, currently we do have in EMIR so-called action type, which provides high-level information of on what happens to a derivative, whether it's a new report or whether a derivative is modified, corrected, terminated, etc. In the revised technical standards, there will be also a field event type, providing more granular information on the nature of the business event that triggers the reporting in a given case. And both action types and event types are defined already in the technical standards. Now, given that this is the baseline for the whole reporting, it determines the whole reporting logic. It's indeed important that this information is reported correctly, and hence also there is a quite extensive section dedicated to those aspects in the draft guidelines included in the consultation paper. Among other things, we intend to provide clarifications on allowable action type and event types combinations, and on allowable sequences of action types, but I will speak about this a bit more in a second when we move to the next slide. We provide also clarifications. Maybe just going back for a second to the previous slide. Yes, thanks. We provide also clarifications on the use of linking IDs, such as prior UTI, subsequent position UTI, and PTRR ID. This is to make sure that regulators are able to analyze, to firstly identify and then analyze the reports of different derivatives that are related to the same life cycle events. So, for instance, derivatives that are terminated or modified, as well as possibly a new derivative stemming from the same post-trade risk reduction event. So this definitely will be also another significant improvement in terms of the usability of the data. There will be, under the new technical standards, a new action type revive, which will allow to reopen the derivatives that were terminated or errored by mistake. So this will facilitate the reporting for the entities, because currently, if this occurs, they are required to, in all cases, to re-report the derivative with a new UTI. Under the new technical standard, they will be able to reopen it with action type revive, of course, with some safeguards to ensure the right balance. So, for instance, the action type revive can be only resubmitted within 30 days from when the derivative stops to be outstanding. And also, when a counterparty submits revive, it needs to submit all the relevant reportable detail of the derivative to ensure that the report reflects the current state of such a derivative. Finally, there is also a section in the guidelines on mapping of business events, which you might have seen a quite long table showing how different events using a terminology applied by the industry should be mapped to the action type and event type specified in the technical standards. So, for instance, if there is a full novation in terms of the reporting logic, it's either termination or new, and combined with the event type step in. I will stop here for a second before moving to the action type, event type combinations and allowable sequences, and see if there are new questions. Yes. Regarding modifications and corrections, should be interpreted to mean that the counterparty does not need to send both a modification and a correction on the same day, but rather only a modification message, which also includes the necessary corrections. Probably it's something that it's maybe it's not mentioned explicitly in the consultation paper. Modification and correction have different meaning, and it's important for the regulators to be able to distinguish between the two. If you think it's not clear in the draft guidelines, then indeed also feedback will be helpful. Will you introduce a position UTI field to be a relation with UTI? Not sure if I fully understand the question, but we do have in the new technical standards a field subsequent position UTI, which is used, which will be used to link the reports pertaining to the derivatives at trade level that are included in the position. with the report pertaining to that position. I see next question. Would there be a difference between intra-group submissions between NFC minus and financial counterparties? I would maybe need a bit more detail on this question, on the background for this question.
Let's probably Asha clarify the aspect that, of course, intergroup transactions which comply with the requirements which are in the regulation, and further clarification has been provided in the ESMA Q&A, are not to be reported. Then, in terms of details, if, for instance, there is a intergroup transaction. If it's an intergroup transaction when there is an NFC, indeed this is something that it's not reportable. Any transaction where there is at least one of the counterparties is NFC, it's not reportable under EMIR. So indeed might be interesting to understand what is the exact background of that question. I have seen also that Andrew Bailey has raised his hand. Probably there is a question also here on lifecycle events. Andrew.
Yeah, thank you very much. And hi, Joanna. Firstly, thank you very much for providing this guidance document. It's been extremely helpful going through this with us to members. I just want to pick up actually on the bullet point, the safeguards regarding the use of Revive. And I know you said this isn't the forum for going into the details and providing additional guidance, but I just wanted to understand a bit better this 30-day limit on reviving trades. When we've been looking at this, a UTI is designed to be assigned to a trade for the life of the trade. And if a trade is accidentally put to a non-outstanding status in error, it should still be able to keep that UTI. So I just wanted to understand a little bit more, if you can, on the safeguards, particularly the 30-day limit, as to why that limit has been brought in.
Yes, indeed, we, as mentioned before, we want to ensure the right balance. So on one hand side, it will be already in our understanding a step in the right direction from the perspective of the counterparties, that they will be able to reopen the derivatives. But on the other hand side, we do not want to change to rely only on this action type revive. We understand that the counterparties should should also implement on their side the necessary procedures to ensure that in general the terminations or errors are not sent when there is no need for such reports, that they are not sent regularly by mistake, that if such event occurs, that that the counterparties are able to detect that such error was made by mistake, and in a timely manner send the report with action type revive. And we want to avoid the wrong incentives for relying only on the action type revive. Maybe just also to mention that we provide additional clarifications in the guidelines around the use of action type revive and how the TRs should proceed later. But also please keep in mind that certain requirements have been included already in the technical standards. So when receiving your feedback, we are definitely open to take into consideration all the possible aspects that are relevant from your perspective. But this should be framed within the limitations of what has been already said in the draft technical standards.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. Thank you.
I see that there are possibly more questions. I'm just wondering how we stand with the time and if we should.
Probably on this one we can give this one more question, which I think it's more of a suggestion for us to better specify some elements. It's more about the event type reporting, and where it is mandatory and when it's not mandatory, and probably how to further specify it, as we have in one of the tables in the consultation paper. Indeed, we say that for action type modify, we might not ask for event type to be reported when there are several events during a given day, no?
Yes, indeed, and actually we are moving to this topic exactly in the next slide. So this is very timely suggestion. On the specific suggestions, as mentioned before, we will try to take note of all of them, but please please make sure that they will be also included in the feedback to the consultation paper. In this way, we will be able to analyze all of them and consider accordingly. So if we go to the next slide. Yes, very quickly, just to make sure that the guidance provided here is understandable and that you can provide your detailed feedback on those matters that are important for the reporting logic. We have prepared a chart showing what are the allowable sequences of action types. So this will be very important to ensure the logical coherence of the reports that will be submitted to the trade repositories. Maybe to give an example, the blue rectangles in the chart show the state of the derivatives. So of course, before the first submission, derivative is not yet reported. The first report that can be submitted with a given UTI is either new or position component. If a counterparty submits a report with action type new, so this is an arrow on the horizontal arrow on the top, the status of the derivative changes to outstanding. Counterparties can, of course, submit then other reports such as modify, correct, valuation update, collateral update, and all these reports, they do not change the status of the derivative. It continues to be outstanding. If a counterparty wants to early terminate an outstanding derivative, it can send a report with action type termination, and this will lead us to the bottom left corner where we have derivatives with status terminated, non-outstanding. And as you can see here, also for those derivatives, the counterparties should still be able to send modifications, corrections, valuation updates, collateral updates. And this is to acknowledge for the fact that sometimes the reports are being made late, and potentially they are made after the derivative is terminated. Still, the same rule applies. Those reports, they do not change the status of the derivative. If the derivative was terminated, it continues as non-outstanding, irrespective of how many modifications or valuation updates are sent for such a derivative. For a terminated or error derivative, it's possible to send an action type revive with all the limitations mentioned before. And in this case, the status of the derivative changes. And one maybe important caveat to mention, it will depend also on the maturity date or potentially early termination date, if provided, whether revived derivatives will be considered outstanding or non-outstanding, and consequently whether it will be included by the TRs in the trade state report. So that would be that for the sequences. So of course, I have not covered all the possible options. And maybe also very quickly on the other table, which shows the allowable combinations of action types and event types, how to read the table. If there is a gray empty cell, it means basically that we do not envisage such combination of action type and event type. In the white cells, where you can see T, P, or both, it means that we think that there is a scenario where such combination is valid. and we specify whether such combination should be possible at trait level, position level, or both. And yeah, as mentioned before, for some action types, we do not expect reporting of event type. This could be in the case, for instance, where evaluation update is submitted or correction. We know why those reports are being made. We do not need any further information on the event type. In the case of modification at position level, we acknowledge that there could be many modifications taking place for a given position on a single day. So if just one report is made at the end of the day, it would not be possible in some cases, to single out all different events. That's why this would be optional at position level to report the event type. Again, I think I will pause here and see if there are questions. Yeah, unclear why there is a revive for a position component and what happens to it after revive. Does it then turn into a normal transaction report? Indeed, it's an aspect that we have not covered explicitly in the consultation paper, I think. So the revive is basically for the derivative with that is terminated, not outstanding in this case. But yeah, it might be a good point to clarify further how the TRs should proceed if the previous report was sent with action type position component. Will subsequent position UTI be required for all inclusion in positioned event types, regardless of execution venue? For listed derivatives, the transactions and positions are often created independently. So in theory, one transaction could be split into multiple positions. Please provide this kind of feedback with all the relevant details and clarifying when this can occur. This is exactly type of feedback that we will be very willing to hear now when we draft the guidelines to be able to, if needed, to account for different scenarios. Okay, I don't see any hand up, and I think this was last question here. So I would suggest to move to the next slide. So reporting at position level, here in terms of the technical standards requirements, there were not many novelties. The draft article is to a great extent based on the content of the current TR Q&A 17. Some additional clarifications are provided in the consultation paper. So, for instance, for the intraday reporting, as mentioned before, we, in principle, would not expect, we would not require all the reports, all the modifications being reported separately at position level. End of day report would be sufficient, and that's why there would be this possibility to leave the event type blank at position level. In the case of zero net positions, the proposed guidance is that the counterparties can, of course, terminate position when it's netted to zero, and if there is no expectations, no expectation that the position will change in the near future, then probably it's also the best way for the counterparties to proceed. However, if the counterparties decide to maintain the position open, the general requirement to report valuations, in this case zero valuations, on a daily basis is retained. The draft guidelines also include clarifications on populations of some specific fields at position level, such as notional or certain dates and timestamps, like execution timestamp or effective date. And also the draft guidelines stress the necessity to report either at position level or trade level consistently by the two counterparties. In particular, as specified in the draft technical standards, if the counterparties want to report at position level, they need to agree on that, which put in other words means that reporting at trade level will be a default option. Is there anything that would need to be clarified to provide feedback to the consultation paper? Any doubt that you would have at this stage? Okay, I don't see questions in the chat nor hands up. So I think we can move to the next slide and the next topic, which is on the timely reporting. So similarly to the, there is one hand up. Is it on the previous slide?
I think actually we have also a question on zero net positions.
Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Hello, David Angeloni from the Italian Banking Association. Yes, actually, I would have a question on the previous part, and I'm sorry that I'm opening up my mic, but unfortunately, the conversation, the chat functionality doesn't work at the moment for me. The only observation that I would have, more than a question, is for you to note that Table 6, which is within the section of reporting at position level, to our understanding, is apparently incorrect. Indeed, in the questions that you pose on this part, we show you that according to our understanding, for example, the maturity date should have been basically the same for the trades that are reported in there. Why I'm mentioning this? Because basically, because of this element, that the maturity dates we expect it to be the same are actually different, we don't really understand how a position level reporting might be done, because you can have a position if the maturity date is the same, basically. But it's a question and an observation at the same time. Just to tell you that the section per se seems clear, but then the table per se shows an example that, to our understanding and analysis, appeared not really realistic, or at least we really didn't understand it. So I don't know whether you may spend a moment to clarify this, or maybe it's not appropriate. We can step forward. We will send you this consideration. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for raising this. Indeed, at the time of drafting, we assumed that in the case where maturities could be different, there is a need to provide a clarification how to report the maturity date at position level. If you think that this is an unrealistic scenario, as you said, please provide the feedback to the consultation paper on this.
Thank you.
I will read out the question received via chat for those that are not connected via Teams. On the zero net positions, flat positions, it seems to make sense to retain the UTIs as positions can frequently go long or short. If the zero positions were maintained, this would mean that there would be many zero positions at trade repositories. Is that problematic? What definitely is problematic from the regulator's perspective is where there are open positions for which no valuations are received, as it's not clear from the data whether whether this position is still outstanding and is still the value and quantity is still zero, or whether simply there has been an omission in the report. That's why in the guidelines it's clarified that there are two possible ways of proceeding, either keeping the position open but then reporting the valuation on a daily basis, or closing the position. It's not possible to retain the same UTI when position is closed and then reopen, and then a new position is open. For any new report, there has to be new UTI. That's why if pair of counterparties knows that this situation where the position has zero quantity is very temporary and with high probability there will be another report very soon, then probably it indeed makes sense to keep the position open. On the other hand side, for if this is a long-term situation, then it may be less efficient for the counterparties to report valuation on a daily basis for a zero valuation on a daily basis for a prolonged period of time. I hope this addresses the question. And if no more comments on the topic of position reporting, then let's move indeed to timely reporting of events. So similarly to the guidelines on reporting under SFTR, under Securities Financing Transaction Regulation, we are planning to provide clarifications on when to report different events, so when to report new derivative, modification, termination, etc. And also how in such reports the field event date should be populated. So for instance, for a new report, it should be the date of conclusion of a derivative. For a modification, it should be the effective date of the modification, and so on and so on. This section of the draft guidelines clarifies also some specific use cases. For instance, that in the case of intraday derivative, so a derivative that was concluded and terminated on the same day, the counterparties are still expected to send the respective reports, new and early termination. In case there is an outstanding derivative that is terminated on its maturity date, there is no need to send a termination report, given that the derivative will be considered to be non-outstanding in any case because of the reaching the maturity date. So all these kinds of clarifications on when and what to report. One aspect that is specifically very important is the treatment of the event date by the trade repositories when they will be constructing the trade state report. And here two options are envisaged. The alternative A, which we call sometimes a simplified approach, and it's an approach that has been applied under SFTR. Is basically that the trade repositories consider the event date only to check if a given report should be taken into consideration for the construction of the trade state report. And this is when the event date is the current date or current date minus 1, given the T+1 reporting deadline. And if this is the case, the reports are sequenced based on the chronological order of submission, and based on that order, the trade state report is updated. So indeed, it may be a bit simpler approach from the perspective of processing of the submissions. However, at least in some scenarios, it may result in the need for the reporting counterparties to send additional reports. So, for instance, if a counterparty submits a late modification and submits it 1 week after the modification took place, so with the event date of the previous week, and there was no other reportable event in the meantime, This would mean that the TRs based on this alternative A would not consider the modification, that modification for the purpose of updating trade state report. So under SFTR, how this was dealt with, the SFTR Q&As provide a series of clarifications on what workarounds can be applied. And in this scenario, for instance, the counterparty would need to send another report, another modification report with, let's say, fake event date of which would be the current date, so that this report is considered. And this is called restamping of the report. So if alternative A would be applied also under EMIR, such kind of workarounds would also need to be implemented. On the other hand, the other possibility is the alternative B, where the TRs would need to fully consider the event date to reconstruct, to replay the order of events as they have taken place, and to update the trade state report accordingly. This question is covered in more details in the last section of the guidelines on data management, and specifically in the subsection on trade state report, with all its advantages and disadvantages of both options respectively, for sure we expect feedback on those aspects from the trade repositories, but we equally think that it will be important to understand preferences or possible limitations on the counterparty side, and to see how burdensome the two options could be. So feedback will be very much welcomed and appreciated on those aspects. I will pause for a second again to see if there are new questions. Okay, there is a hand up. Yes, Andrew, please go ahead.
Hi, Joanna. Yeah, Andrew Bailey at ISDA again. I just wanted to ask actually about the use of event date for modification action types, just so I've understood correctly. You're saying that for a modification, the event date is populated with the date the modification becomes effective. Is that to say if I was to modify a trade today, which is effective in 2 days' time, you don't have to delay the reporting of the modification, but the event date will be a future date? Is that the correct understanding of what?
Thanks for the question, a very good one. We do not expect modifications to be reported in advance as any other lifecycle events. They should be reported when they happen, and the reporting deadline is T+1. So if today we agree on a modification to happen in 2 days' time, we should submit such a modification report in 2 days or in 3 days, indicating the 22nd of September as the event date.
Okay. So you delay the actual reporting, even though you've executed it today.
I think this, to my best memory, I think this should be actually covered in the draft guidelines when we speak about the timely reporting of the modification. It's a small subsection, but we take note of the comment.
Yeah, no, I know the section you mean. We did pick up on it when we was going, when we was going through it. Just wanted to clarify, since we've got the opportunity. Okay, thank you very much, Joanna.
Thank you. Okay, I think we can move to the next topic, which is on the unique trait identifier. And here, a very quick recap of what has been included in the technical standards. So firstly, the expanded rules for determining the entity responsible for the generation of the UTI. To a great extent, they are similar to the current rules under EMIR, However, it's important to keep in mind that the revised rules are aligned with the global guidance on the UTI and will cover also the scenario of cross-jurisdictional trades to ensure the complete global uniqueness of the UTIs. The technical standards cover also the timeline for the generation and sharing of the UTIs. We know that currently it is sometimes an issue that results in data quality problems when the UTI is generated or shared late. So timeline, deadline of 10 a.m. Of the working day following the conclusion of the contract has been established. And finally, the technical standards specify also the structure and the format of the UTI, which is stricter than the current one. In the guidelines, so firstly, we include a flowchart illustrating the rules for determining the entity responsible for the UTI generation. There is nothing new on top of the technical standards. These are exactly the same rules, but given that that article in the technical standards, I think it's quite long, one of the longest, and the rules might not be very clear from the first reading. The guidelines include also this flowchart that show the rules in a bit more visual way, hopefully easier to follow. The guidelines specify also how the counterparties should proceed when UTI is not generated as envisaged in this waterfall approach. In particular, it's stressed that the counterparties should follow up with the entity responsible for the generation rather than simply not report or use their own UTI, because this we know that is something that occurs sometimes nowadays. There is also consideration given to the sooner reporting deadline. It's one of the steps in the waterfall in the case of cross-jurisdictional trades that are not concluded on a venue and not cleared. And we know that there are some questions in the industry how exactly sooner reporting deadline should be determined. It's definitely one of the aspects that is also discussed by the regulators in the international fora, because it's important to coordinate between different jurisdictions. However, in the meantime, we decided to include this question also in our consultation paper to understand if from the perspective of European reporting entities there are any preferences or any constraints in applying any of the three options proposed in the paper. And finally, there is also guidance on how to understand exactly the alphabetical sorting, which is relevant for the solution of the last resort, which is sorting of the reversed EDIs. So it's clarified that it should be a simple ASCII order. So yes. Again, I will pause here and see if there are additional questions related to the unique trade identifier. There is one question, and again, I will read it out also for people that are connected via phones. Would a permanent agreement among the parties involved on the UTI generation allow the parties to overcome the waterfall presented on page 62, given that such agreements would allow achieving the goal of secure and certain UTI generation with a simpler approach compared to the waterfall? No. The exact rules for determining the entity responsible for the generation are specified already in the technical standards, and they follow the global guidance on the UTI. There are only some scenarios where a counterparty's agreement comes into place, but this is when the previous steps in the waterfall cannot be applied, do not apply. I would even the flowchart in the guidelines only reflects what is already stated, what is already enshrined in the technical standards and in the global guidance. But also wanted to mention here that from our perspective, this should ensure better coordinated generation of the UTIs, because currently under the current EMIR rules, as you may recall, indeed the agreement between the counterparties is a first default option, and only if it's not achieved, the other steps come into the play. However, from our experience, even if the counterparties think that there is an agreement, we often observe situations where the different UTIs are reported by the counterparties to the same trade, and the derivatives remain unpaired. Another question, can you please kindly explain what is meant with is the transaction cross-jurisdictional? What jurisdictions are you referring to? Yes, so this stems from the global guidance, and here we consider EU to be the jurisdiction. So for instance, EU counterparty versus US or versus Japanese counterparty would be cross-jurisdictional. German versus French would be not. Another question, given the UTI waterfall and sooner reporting deadline proposal for cross-jurisdictional, just a second, for cross-jurisdictional trades, is the intention that the validations from all of the various regulators are the same for the UTI. So the validations might be stricter or less strict depending on the regulators. However, the structure and the format of the UTI that have been proposed in the technical standards are based on the global UTI guidance, and there is expectation that all the regulators would follow the same format. To what extent it will be validated, there might be some regulators that will have more relaxed rules, but the expected format will be the same. Hello, in the UTI generation flowchart, the question is the EU counterparty the one with the sooner deadline? Is referred to the EU counterparty that has the reporting obligation under EMIR. Example, the case of EU counterparty that has both EMIR and the Dodd-Frank Act reporting obligation. The question is referred only to EMIR obligation. That is, if the swap is also under Dodd-Frank Act regulation for that EU counterparty, the answer to this question is no, in order to follow the next step. Indeed, we interpret that the cross-jurisdiction, the determination of whether whether the trade is cross-jurisdictional or not should be done based on the reporting counterparties. We just to add on this once more on the last question. So based on the reporting counterparties, meaning where the reporting counterparties are located, irrespective of possible nexus reporting. I see one more question. Why cross-jurisdictional? Currently reporting to other jurisdictions is single-sided. Should this be changed? I cannot, of course, comment on other jurisdictions' requirements, but an easy example would be a derivative between an EU counterparty and US counterparty. Each of the counterparties has a reporting obligation in its respective jurisdiction. For the purpose of global aggregation, it's necessary that the UTI is reported consistently. I think we have exhausted, for the time being, questions on the unique trait identifier, and can move to the next topic. And here I would like just to thank very quickly for the good and relevant questions, and hand over to my colleague Nikolai.
Thank you, Joanna. So, as we have been discussing, indeed, several important elements of the consultation today, and most importantly, what we believe is crucial, as it was mentioned. But I want to again restate it: important to today to provide you with all the relevant background and explanations for our proposals. And indeed, of course, to ensure that all the elements that have been included there are clearly understood by you, so that when, in case you decide to provide feedback to the consultation paper, you can indeed include those points which are relevant indeed for the further clarification on those additional aspects, which, as we know, it's always possible to have areas which are not fully covered, or where some further ambiguity might exist. Therefore, it indeed is imperative that ESMA clarifies those elements, so that all the participants have clarity on their reporting obligations. The next element on which we wanted to bring your attention is the update of the LEI. The update of the LEI, it's covered in two technical standards. We have it in the Article 8 of the ITS, where basically it sets up the information that it's relevant from counterparty perspective, but also we have the provision in the RTS on data quality, where basically there is also included the timeline for the update of the LEI by the TRs, and the whole process that the TRs need to implement. The whole let's put it this way: the whole process, indeed, it's spread between two technical standards, of course, because the process indeed requires intervention both from counterparties or entities responsible for reporting and from trade repositories. The important element that it's being clarified in the guidelines, indeed, together with the further better specification of the timelines, which are already in the technical standard, is also how the interaction between the update of the LEI and action type revive, in which instances and how LEI should be updated. Indeed, as Joanna was mentioning, action type revive, it's a new action type which is included in EMIR to facilitate reporting. It is included specifically to remove the issues around regeneration of the UTI. However, of course, it is important there to know that action type revive needs to be used with a lot of caution on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is important to ensure that the quality of the data remains high, even though there is certain flexibility for counterparties to report. Of course, as it was also mentioned, the need to have action type revive and the update of the LEI, it's also relevant from the perspective of the global reporting and global aggregation. No, so the process is mainly included in technical standards. In the guidelines, we have particularly clarification to ensure that the process is well understood by market participants and by trade repositories, and of course that also that information about that can reach the relevant market participants in due time. so that they can also adjust their systems accordingly and include the updated LEIs in their systems. No? So I would pause here. I would see if there are any questions or any particular aspect which might not be clear in the provided guidance that we need to further specify. I don't see. Let's move then to the next point, which is valuation and margins reporting. Here again, important part of the rules are already in the technical standards. What we have in the guidelines are further clarifications and inclusions of additional guidance to better support reporting by counterparties with regards to valuations and margins. You are all aware this is critical information for the objectives of EMIR. The reporting of valuations and margins is essential to monitor systemic risk to financial stability. To financial stability, it is essential for us to be in a position to understand whether there is any buildup of leverage, buildup of risks in the financial system, specifically through the use of derivatives, and be in a position to accurately understand exposures between the entities. Therefore, from the perspective of the competent authorities, but not only competent authorities, all the authorities that have access to data, this is an essential information that is to be reported accordingly. No? So what we have included here is that further guidance having already leveraged on the experience under EMIR, that counterparty should report positive or negative valuation, depending on, of course, the value of the contract. Should be, in that sense, total value. It should not be the margin call. It is or the daily change. It is expected to be the total value. Therefore, by looking at the value of the contract, by looking at the margin, authorities can easily understand what are, as I mentioned, the exposures, the risks stemming from those transactions, and be in a position to assess whether an entity or group of entities are exposed to certain additional risk which might need to be accounted. No? What else we have included as clarification in this section, which is indeed quite an extensive one. Also, what happens if there is payment to receipt of variation margining. This is one of the elements which indeed also currently now we have been clarifying, and whether it's possible to send a zero valuation. This is not the case. The value, as I mentioned, is the total value of the derivative, and the variation margins paid to received would not alter it. It needs to be included in the relevant fields for variation margining. Then, of course, there is additional guidance how to determine valuation method, the reporting of delta for options and swaptions. What happens, of course, when we have collateral in several currency or so-called multi-currency collateral? How should be reported, and then, of course, treatment of portfolios when there are there are not only derivatives. This guidance is indeed also aligned with the one that we have under SFTR. For that purpose, to the extent that, of course, collateral is attributable directly, it has to be included as much as possible. Otherwise, the counterparties need to report what they know, and as much as it is attributable to the derivatives transactions. Then what happens, of course, with collateral in transit and collateral below the minimum transfer amount. No? So these are all areas on which we have provided clarification in the guidelines, on which we, of course, expect to receive feedback, understand whether there are issues that need to be further specified or clarified in that regard. So I would now look to the to the questions. There are a few questions here. Okay, on paragraph 299, what is expected to be reported variation margin of long-standing open contracts? Contracts can go back years. New EMIR reporting requirements states that the total value of margins are to be reported instead of daily settled exchanged margin. See detailed example on page 82 of consultation paper. So what if day one is back in 2019 and the first reporting date is from contract perspective day 3000? So one important element here, the reporting, of course, with the new rules is prospective reporting. It starts from the events after, of course, the new rules are reported. In this regard, it's also important to mention rules regarding reporting of margin or valuation have not changed. We are simply specifying them here, and we're including a greater level of guidance. However, rules about the reporting of valuations and margins, they remain the same as they are now. The issue is that many counterparties do not report appropriately. No, so under the new rules, what is going to be the expectation is that indeed, and having provided already that clarifications, of course, we hope and expect entities to start reporting accordingly already now. But anyway, from the date of the application of the new rules, entities become reporting the valuation of the contract in total terms and the total margin that is applicable to that contract. So that when authorities, let's imagine that the reporting requirements become applicable in 2023, authorities can see at the data on the first day of reporting what is the exposure, what is the value of the contract, and what are the margins that have been exchanged. Therefore, they know how much one entity is exposed to the other. Another question, margin haircuts may be applied at group entity level rather than at portfolio level, i.e. different level of reporting. How should be represented in the reporting of collateral portfolio against a specific counterparty? Indeed, this is a good use case that it's important that you make us aware. Please include it also in your feedback. Short answer following the guidance that we have provided, but as I mentioned, today's discussion it's mostly to clarify whether there are some elements that need still to be clarified to you rather than to provide guidance. But short answer in this regard is going to be that we would need to have the total the collateral as it is provided, i.e. net of the margins or net of the haircuts. But on this one, and specifically when there might be more than one entity involved, and indeed there is a different way in which collateralization is implemented, it's going to be important to provide us with all the relevant background so that once we define those or finalize those definitions, this is duly included into our guidance, and indeed that specific use case it's considered and it's reported in the most appropriate way from risk perspective. Next question. It should be clear that for example, ETD positions with day close out, there is no exposure at the end of the day and the value of the contract is zero. The only margin is then the initial margin covering future value changes before the next closeout. I think on that we have something in the CP, and if we don't, we definitely include it. As I mentioned, the payment or lack of payment of variation margin per se does not change neither the valuation of the contract. It only refers to the amount of variation margin that is being paid. Therefore, in this regard, let's say this type of end of day zeroing out of the valuation, at least from as the situation is now, until we receive input or feedback which can better specify it, this is not appropriate way forward. This is not a question but remark. If a margin is being cash settled daily, then the exposure is, in my view, really not the total margin as detailed in the example. Okay, well, this is, as it mentioned, it's a remark. Indeed, from that perspective, and I think this is something that we also discuss with CCPs, it is important to receive your feedback. Of course, this part of the guidance is going to be assessed and further discussed among authorities. Therefore, indeed, it's important to have your input. Also, it's important for you to understand that once we provide the guidance, or when we provide the guidance, it's a guidance which we expect to be applicable for all types of contracts, and we expect the consistency that is established in the way in which it's established, and of course it's appropriate, to allow us as authorities to have a clear, unambiguous, and harmonized view of exposures between entities. I think with that, I don't see more questions. Oh, wait, this point is really important to understand. Wait, just a second. This point is really important to understand. In the understanding of exposure and collateral, we will provide more detail, but if still does not convince, no problem for having additional clarification if, of course, the ones that are provided in the context of the consultation are not sufficient. From our perspective, of course, as I mentioned, where we are heading is to have a consistent guidance on the reporting of exposures, because it's indeed is essential for the monitoring of financial stability, and for us it's critical to ensure that now. Well, now it's 7 years, not 7 years and a half after the start of the reporting obligation. But when the new rules enter into force, there would be 9 years. Indeed, we have a very clear understanding across authorities and market participants, but not only understanding, but also very unambiguous and straightforward reporting of exposures between entities. I would suggest then we move to the next slide. So this slide now we change a bit of the scenery here. This is about ensuring that the quality of the data that is reported by counterparties. So there is, as you have probably seen, a very, very extensive section on data quality by trade repositories, but there are also certain requirements for data quality by counterparties. Where those come from? Of course, those come from the technical standards, where following the new update, and in order again to harmonize and streamline reporting requirements and reporting framework across the different transaction reporting regimes in the Union, we have included an additional requirement for counterparties to inform the authorities where there is a significant number of reports or significant issues which turn into reporting problems or reporting errors, prevent them or introduce mistakes in their reporting. No? So this is already, as I mentioned, requirement in the technical standards. Similar requirement exists currently under MiFIR, and indeed the main objective of it is that even when potentially or specific reporting issue at the counterparty side might not lead to immediate rejections by the trade repositories, those still might impact the quality of the data being reported. Imagine a clear example in that case being that counterparties submit figures which are not accurate in their reports. No? So in that regard, and since we are all aware that some of those issues might not be immediately solved, indeed, this is additional additional channel to notify the authorities and to ensure that when this happens, authorities are already aware that such a situation is to happen. Therefore, in the guidelines, actually, what we have are, and there indeed is going to be important also to gather the feedback from from respondents to understand thoughts about the proposed ways to determine significant number of reports and significant issues. Why it is important? Of course, we have mentioned in the consultation paper. Authorities do not want, of course, to receive non-significant notifications, but on the other hand, we need also to be able to somehow establish a balance and also make sure that indeed, when there is a significant either number of report or where there is a reporting issue which is significant, authorities are made aware of it without undue delay. No. So from that perspective, it's going to be important in this exercise of calibration to gather your feedback on the proposed threshold, on the approach itself, whether it's there is something else that could be added into that approach to better clarify it, or to simplify it, or to specify it in a way in which indeed it's aligned with the requirement of the regulation and also provides a sufficient level of knowledge and intelligence to the competent authorities for them to be able to assess, monitor those issues, and of course ensure that those issues are remediated at the earliest opportunity. I'll pause here again to understand and to see if there is anything unclear, anything which might be important now to clarify some certain additional aspects of our proposal, or otherwise needs further clarification from our side. I don't see any. Oh, there was another question. Sorry, this is a question which is still on the collateral. The question is: do you consider that the dependent amount as defined by ISDA should be reported in the excess collateral fields? To be honest, now I would suggest that we receive further information on that aspect before we can better specify that element. Asia?
Yes, indeed. I would just mention that it's worth taking a look at the definition of excess collateral that says that it should be the collateral that is posted independently and separately from initial margin and variation margin. But we do, to my best recollection, we do not have anything in the draft guidelines specifically on the independent amount, and it's a valid point. So as Nikolai said, it will be very helpful to receive more thoughts on this aspect.
Thank you. Then there is another comment. This is now on the ensuring equality by counterparties. I think it's more comment. The proposed thresholds were very helpful and a good step in the right direction. It seems calculating it on a monthly basis is probably preferable, as otherwise very small outages only affecting 1 day and remediated quickly might be notified. Indeed, as we have mentioned on that one, there are two perspectives to looking into it, something which indeed might be a short period of time but very significant, or long-lasting and potentially with more limited impact. Important to receive feedback from market participants so that we indeed the calibration can be done in the most adequate way for all parties, with the main objective, as I indicated, that authorities are made aware as early as possible of some issues which might affect the quality of the reporting or the actuality of reporting, so that then indeed this can be taken also into account into the supervision of the relevant entity. So indeed feedback here is essential so that the calibration is done in the most appropriate way. Okay, let's move to the next one. The next slide is about the data quality feedback. So this is the other side of the data quality provisions, as we were discussing up to now. Previous section was on how data quality notifications by counterparties to authorities. Here we are discussing about data quality feedback from trade repositories to counterparties and responsible for reporting, report submitting entities, and third parties, and to authorities, of course. Already now in different shape and form, counterparties receive information about the derivatives that have been rejected, and also receive information about the reconciliation of those derivatives that are accepted and which are subject to reconciliation. The element, of course, here that is a novelty is that under EMIR Refit and following the journey and the direction of travel towards standardization of reporting, ISO and end-to-end ISO has also been included here and has an important impact, so that all the information that counterparties receive back from trade repositories is in a standardized format, in a way in which it can facilitate the it's machine readable, and it facilitate the more automatized treatment of that information, and of course the resolution in due time of all the relevant elements, being it reporting of transaction after remediation of certain data elements which are not in accordance with the regulation, or their correction, and or the updates to derivatives in a way to ensure that those can be reconciled between the trade repositories. There are two new sets of feedback. One is about warnings, more specifically, and this is a new set of, let's put it this way, software validations, which were included in the technical standards already, and it refers to missing valuations, missing margins, and abnormal values in the derivatives reports. Again, specifically on abnormal values, the focus is mainly on numerical fields, but the other two reports are indeed extremely important from supervisory perspective to ensure that the information that is at trade repositories is as current and up to date as possible. For some of those, as Ioana was mentioning before, there could be the zero positions at the end of the day. However, this does not mean that there should be no valuations reported for those positions, neither margin information. Therefore, this is one of the critical elements there. And also through these reports, authorities can monitor more closely that even in those specific and edge cases, the correct reporting of additional information relevant for those derivatives is in place. And finally, with regards to Revive, here the data quality feedback and the consultation goes more into direction of what happens, and actually there is a rejection if there is a Revive 30 days after termination or erroring of a derivative, right? So this is the type of information which is to be provided to counterparties, but also authorities. This is going to be also provided to authorities in order, of course, to have the most accurate view on the quality of the data that is being reported and on issues on which, of course, the regulatory community might need to act upon to ensure that if these are indeed widespread, imagine high level of fields being rejected, of derivatives with the same field being rejected, there might be some issue there where there needs to be a regulatory or supervisory action similar on the reconciliation side, and so on and so forth. So I'll pause here, go back to the chat, see where we are. Second. Okay, so when will be available the EMIR XML schemas? So in the consultation paper, you have already seen the EMIR schemas. There are, of course, drafts. Our intention is, this is where we are working, the schemas, and I think we have mentioned this in few occasions. The schemas are going to be closely aligned to the schemas which already exist for the CDID, the global guidance. The intention also in terms of the timeline is that when we publish the final report on the guidelines, it is accompanied with XML schemas. So the let's say end of the next quarter and beginning of the following one, they should be already in my standards, and they're going to be, of course, subject to the usual process of approval at the ISO level, which, as we have mentioned in many occasions, is one of the most essential benefits of having adopted ISO 20022 standards and using XML schemas based on those standards and methodology to ensure that also market participants, of course, the regulatory community have a view on those rules, can comment, can make improvements and adjustments in order to ensure that those have the highest quality possible. Will ESMA allow TRs to offer the choice of XML or CSV when producing end-of-day reports like the TSR? XML it's mandatory to be provided, so there is no possibility of choice. The vast report of market participants have already built oversight and process around the CSV report, so to move off this would be very costly. Here we again have the questions, and I think it is important that you flag this to us, and it's important that indeed you provide in your response certain feedback on that element. But there is one aspect which I think it's essential to consider, which is the final report and the technical standards, the draft technical standards on reporting and data quality already prescribe XML schemas and feedback in XML. Therefore, with the guidelines, as the guidelines are level 3 instrument, guidelines clarify what is already in level 1 and level 2 and provide further indeed elements which are relevant for the implementation of those requirements, but the guidelines cannot change or alter the technical standards. Therefore, the requirement for XML schemas is already in the technical standard, and this is the requirement that should be followed. And indeed, the expectation is that the processes are organized around XML schemas, particularly because of the huge impact on that it has on data quality, and which we have observed, for instance, with SFTR, where the picture from the start of reporting, but also with MiFID, has been completely different from the one under EMIR. Indeed, it's important to provide us with some elements of judgment here from your side, but and feedback. But please know that this is what the technical standards already provide for. Therefore, in the guidelines, we simply specify elements of for the implementation of those schemas. Okay. Just give 20 more seconds. Some note from a TR interface perspective. Does this only mean data displayed on the screen, or does this include output from a portal? Indeed, some note from DTC. This is important element. From our side, the interface means provision of data to the counterparties in a format which is not the XML, and more particularly means in a way in which is view only for those participants which are not so sophisticated, and for them this is only a way to have a control on what has happened, but indeed the use of other interface, at least from the perspective of regulation, is not to be understood as not providing information in XML. It's provided in view-only type, etc. From that perspective, it's important also that you may provide us with your feedback, your input in that regard, so that indeed the specific requirement at level, which is in level 2 about providing data through other interface, is better also clarified in the guidelines. Okay, I think we have exhausted that topic. May I ask the next why there is another one? Why reject revive is after 30 days? It's a timeline which was already set up in the technical standards. The reason was to ensure that counterparties can do it, but also more than 30 days would potentially bring some difficulties also for the TRs to retrieve the data correctly, and also we have aligned the period of 30 days to the timeline for the reconciliation process. Therefore, we ensure that derivatives are usually excluded under the new rules from reconciliation after 30 days. Therefore, the intention was to align those. If there is no revive after 30 days, the derivative cannot be revived and cannot be included in the reconciliation process. And indeed, if this has to happen, the counterparties then need to report with a new UTI. We know that this limitation is indeed might be seen as burdensome, but just to remember where we're coming from a regime where basically after erroring a derivative, it has to be always reported with a new UTI. Now the flexibility has been introduced, and it is our understanding that after 30 days, counterparties would have a very clear idea whether the derivative has been terminated or not, whether has existed or not, and report that action type accordingly. Okay, and timely, even more importantly. Let's move to the next one. The next one is about the validation rules. You are aware validation rules and now also XML schemas are two main elements in the implementation of the reporting regime. ESMA has included them as part of the consultation on the guidelines. It's the validation rules, it's also the reconciliation tolerances. I'll speak a bit later about the reconciliation tolerances. I think we had also a question there in the beginning of the session. What we can say about the validation rules and the inclusion now in the consultation. The structure, as you have seen, and I hope you have appreciated, follows the current structure, the existing structure of 4 categories of fields: mandatory, conditional, optional, non-applicable, specified for the 2 levels, transaction and position, and per action type. We have not included event type. From our perspective, this is not relevant for the reporting. However, if for certain use case you believe that this might be the case, please include it in your feedback to the consultation. The validation rules and reconciliation tolerances are separate file, Excel file, published at the same place as the consultation paper. It can be filled in and has to be actually filled in separately. And when you submit your response, you can submit it too. What is important here, and this is a message that we are giving, and we want, of course, to go through very well. We expect and we indeed welcome feedback on the validation rules, so as to ensure that when the reporting regime kicks in, 18 months, as we know, after the publication of the technical standards in the official journal, the validation rules are as complete as possible to ensure stable reporting for at least certain period of time. I don't want to say 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, but at least a stable reporting for a certain period of time to also minimize the cost and effort at counterparties, but also at TRs to implement changes. Therefore, it's we would invite you indeed to review the validation rules in detail, to review the relevant rules that are included and relevant dependencies which are included for those validation rules, and made us aware where, for those instances where you believe that validation rules need to be made stricter or relaxed, further conditions to be included, some conditions to be removed. Explain please your use case. There is enough place there, and made us aware. The intention indeed is, once we receive that input, the validation rules then finalized, and indeed they in a stable shape and form for sufficient time after the start of the reporting under the new rules. Similar comment also to the reconciliation tolerances, but as I mentioned, this would come later on. So just a second here, I have seen question. Optional fields are intended to be optional for the reporting for those fields like NA. So optional fields means a field which is not conditionally dependent on another field. It's a field which counterparty may populate or not, which we don't know whether the counterparty would populate, but in a given instance, this can happen. One of the reasons could be that for that specific field, we are not aware of all the use cases, so the field is optional. In certain instances, when the field is optional, the field, when populated, might need still to require certain, there might be certain requirements applicable to that field, i.e. the fact that the field is optional does not mean that there is no validation there. However, when the field is populated, there is no requirement for the field to be populated, but however, when it is populated, it shall follow potentially a specific format. No? I think on this one you have several use cases, and indeed it's important also to bring to our attention where you believe that some fields which are optional should become, for instance, conditional or mandatory, or, and usually the case it's more from optional to go to conditional, i.e. when we're in a position to specify all the foreseeable universe of use cases and be able to ensure that those fields are indeed correctly reported when they are reported. Another question, validation regarding LEI and their status. It should be helpful to specify when exactly the LEI has to be in acceptable status. Okay, the time of execution, time of reporting, or type of TR validation. Okay. An entity might conclude a derivative on their last day of existence, e.g. before a merger, and since this is reported on T+1, the LEI would be retired at the time of reporting. Well, this is indeed an interesting use case that that could be considered. Bear in mind a few things: update of LEI and the procedure for update of LEI, and what happens and how this should be organized between the counterparty and the trade repositories, and when the reporting of that derivative would happen, and when the reporting of the change of the LEI would happen. So this is something that needs to be also very well understood. You have seen there is a specific timeline for reporting of changes to the LEI by counterparties to the TRs through, of course, an organized process outside the data reporting to the TR and the derivatives reporting to the TR. And indeed, it is at the time of reporting when the counterparty needs to its status needs to be appropriate. No, needs to be one of the accepted statuses. Asha, I don't know whether you wanted to add something.
Yes, mainly to bring to everyone's attention that the draft validations, including also the rules about the acceptable status of the EDI, have been included in the table in this column just before the orange column, so conditions and format and content. So if you take a look at the specific fields such as reporting counterparty, and then go to this column, you will see the draft rules. So for instance, we do recognize that it's beneficial when it's always possible to error or terminate the derivative, and the validation rules for those action types are a bit more relaxed. But in case of new or modification reports, the status of the EDI must be adequate, must be renewed. So lapsed for the reporting counterparty is not accepted. So if indeed these are very valid points, and if you want to provide feedback on those specific aspects, you can take a look at the draft rules that have been included in the table. We'll definitely appreciate that.
Thank you, Ioana. Okay, let's see if there are more questions. I don't see. No. Okay, let's move to the next slide. This is trade state report. Ioana referred to trade state report before when discussing about the timeliness of reporting. Indeed, the trade state report is one of the key reports that TRs provide. It is a report which is to be provided to counterparties, but also to authorities. And as I mentioned, and it is where indeed the correctness, timeliness of reporting of all the details of the derivatives, but even more importantly, valuation and margin information is essential. Which are the important and the relevant elements that indeed have to be considered. This section, as you can imagine, and has to be read together with the section about the timeliness of reporting, as I mentioned, and in particular the treatment of event date. Of course, the expectation from the regulatory community is that of course, the treatment of event date is taken into account when trade state is being constructed. It is also important that trade state is a report which indeed is has always been existing at the trade repositories, but previously there have been less detailed rules how it should be created. No? So the intention here is indeed to further support the work of the TRs in calculating this report, support the work of the authorities when they analyze the data by bringing a harmonized and standardized way of the generation of that report. No, so. As I mentioned, we have discussed there the treatment of event date, which is critical. Then we have discussed and we have included a section on the uniqueness of derivatives, and in which case and when certain fields can be changed or not be changed of those that are being reported. Of course, one of the stars, of course, of that consultation, at least because of the number of questions that we have received, which is action type revive and how should be treated for the purposes of the trade state report. Of course, reporting of action type error, then inclusion in the trade state report of notional schedules and other payments. Here, in particular, emphasis is on whether the trade state report should include all the information that is reported by a given date, or specifically when there are notional schedules, i.e. changes to the notional amount which are predefined from the outset of the derivative. Those could be reported and included in the report by the TR as they go, i.e. the ones that are applicable in the current state. This is indeed something on which, from the perspective of the authorities, but also of the counterparties, is important to receive feedback. This section on trade state report, then it's also very closely linked to the subsequent one on reconciliation, where indeed several of the discussions which take place when defining the trade state report might affect the reconciliation process. So indeed, also I want to invite you, when you provide your answers on trade state report, also to think about potential impact about of the way in which trade state report is being constructed and built through the reconciliation process. And finally, we treat here the so-called debt derivatives. Debt derivatives are derivatives where the counterparty has gone out of business, and then there are also potentially the other counterparty has gone out of business, and specifically what to do with the remaining derivatives, which are basically records. This is particularly the case when it refers to derivatives without a maturity date or with a longer maturity date, and of course those pollute the data. The guidance that has been included here is closely linked to the ESMA current Q&A 57, if I'm not wrong, where the process per se is outlined, specified in which cases, which identities which participate in the process. Of course, here it is also important to bear in mind the criticality of having such records, because at the end, in most of the cases, those are single-sided reports where the entity that has remained, the side that has been remained of the one of the entity that has gone out of business. So here, important again to receive feedback from your side about potentially other use cases, some criteria to determine that that situation, some other helpful ideas also about how to better deal with those. Of course, forward-looking ESMA authorities would monitor that aspect to reduce as much as possible the existence of the trades, especially when, of course, the entities affected are under the supervision of the authorities. But there are other instances in which those might be a bit, for instance, certain non-financials or member states where there are different supervisory responsibility, they are not directly allocated to a given authority, and so on and so forth. No? So from that perspective, for us, as authorities, and in this consultation, what is relevant is to gather feedback from your side about each and every of those elements pertaining to the trade state report, how, in your view, the proposals that ESMA has outlined or the alternatives that have been proposed are sufficient to support the high quality of the data that is expected to be received and used by everyone following the entry into force of the new reporting requirements. I would pause here, have a look at the chat. We are still on slide 14. Do you plan to have a method in order to erase data reported previously by mistake, e.g. termination date to any optional field that is not possible to delete? So there is no, let's put it this way, the TRs do not erase the data. The data, of course, can be removed from the trade repositories according to the EMIR 10 years after the maturity or termination of the derivative. However, here, when information is reported by mistake, the way to proceed is to submit a new report with action type correction and include the correct details of the derivative to ensure that indeed it is corrected, right? In certain instances, if the derivative has been terminated and removed from the trade state, for instance, then there is also the action type. There is also action type revive, or of course there is action type which is or the correction action type to ensure that the details are corrected and indeed the reporting represents accurately the status of the derivative. Another question: in case a financial counterparty is responsible to report on behalf of a non-financial miners, but non-financial miners do not update the LEI, who will be responsible for this? Well, ESMA has a Q&A on that, and plus there is a guidance in the section which Ioana was presenting, I would say, in the beginning of today's open hearing. What we invite indeed is that NFC minus updates its LEI at the earliest opportunity, because also it's the understanding that even though for OTC derivatives the reporting responsibilities with the FC, most probably the NFC minus has reporting responsibilities for exchange traded derivatives. Therefore, and not only because of that, but indeed it's the expectation that the counterparties to a derivative have the most up-to-date information and provide it to the relevant entities in the reporting chain in due time. What we have included in the as part of the guidance is indeed that in those cases, as soon as the update happens, the FC needs to report the relevant sides of the derivative, with also the expectation that in the meantime the financial counterparty would have reported accordingly its side of the derivative. And as Ioana was mentioning, for certain action type, for the other counterparty, the validations from LA perspective are a bit more relaxed in order to not forbid or in order to limit any potential issue with reporting post conclusion of the derivative. Okay. I don't see more questions at this stage. Let's move to the last slide, the one on reconciliation. As I mentioned previously, this is a slide which is very closely linked to the trade state one. Of course, there are some additional elements that have been clarified in the guidelines. For instance, we have clarified and how the TRs need, which are the data fields that TRs need to look to ensure the scope, to determine the scope of the data. Then we have had an interesting discussion between two alternatives, how to reconcile position level derivatives versus how to reconcile transaction level derivatives. So there indeed it's important to gather your feedback. Basically the proposals go into the direction that for position level information, TRs, it is better that trade repositories take not the latest information, but previous information, whereas for transaction level, for the reconciliation of transaction level data, the information that is taken is the latest that has been reported. No, of course, and this is something that we want to, we will be assessing following the receipt of the feedback. There is also the possibility to align the two ways of the reconciliation of the two levels of data. Let's put it this way. Next point is reconciliation evaluation. Basically, here the process it's very simple. First of all, we have established a separate valuation status for the derivative. Therefore, only the fields which are related to valuation would have an impact on. I.e., if all the rest of the fields are fully reconciled, the derivative is going to be considered as if only the valuation is not reconciled. And here the important element on which we are consulting is whether all the records, irrespective of whether the counterparties have obligation to report valuation, i.e. including the non-financial below the clearing threshold, are included in the reconciliation process evaluation, or only the derivatives for where the two counterparties are obliged to report valuation. No? So from that perspective, indeed, one alternative is much simpler, but on the other hand, the one which is only those that it's applicable, it's more accurate. No? Indeed, here it's important to have the feedback from market participants, and of course also from trade repositories, being the understanding that indeed having the same process, it's much simpler. But then, for instance, the process might be the same, but we could have additional adjustments with regards to the status. No? And then the next element and aspect on which we discuss is how derivatives with two legs should be reconciled. To make it very simple, the big question here is whether the counterparty should always follow the same sequence of reporting, leg 1, leg 2, or there could be a random reporting of leg 1 and leg 2 by each of the two counterparties of the derivative, but still the TR be able to reconcile them successfully. Here, you have seen our questions in the CP, but what I can only add is for the request from our side is indeed if you also consider additional elements, additional aspects that might be taken into account to better standardize and make the process more straightforward, it's going to be indeed very much welcome and appreciated by ESMA and the regulatory community to ensure that indeed those derivatives could be reconciled in a swift and correct manner, of course. Reconciliation of notional schedules and other payments. This is linked to that discussion on the trade state report that I mentioned to you, and indeed here the big question is whether only the latest, sorry, not the latest, the applicable notional schedules should and other payments should be included, information on those fields, or the full schedule should be reconciled. No? Indeed, in some cases, this might be quite an important amount of data to be reconciled on a daily basis, and that's where indeed it's important to have information on the also costs and benefits for the different market participants. Last point here is specifically we have outlined the situation about a reconciliation of derivatives between systematic internalizers, being the only difficulty there that there are different venues. So it is more to see how to better proceed with those also from the perspective of the data analysis, and again the reconciliation of the data. So I'll stop here. I see that there are a few questions. Indeed, on the first question so the first question is to be able to provide feedback. Could you clarify the alternatives for considering evaluation fields? Does alternative mean both sides should have evaluation data reporting last 14 days to be included in the regulation, or only one side? Is the intent of alternative A to exclude NFC minus derivatives from the process? Indeed, this is the main aspect here. Either we focus only on those derivatives where both counterparties have obligation to report valuation, or alternative B, all of them. No. Related to pairing, as trade repositories are looking to pair any trade reported where both parties identified with their respective LEI and both are located within the EU, how should we populate field 1.3 ID of the other counterparty for a counterparty which is registered within the EU and has a valid LEI, but which is not EU undertaking and is therefore exempted from reporting each side of its trade? Should we identify such counterparty with LEI, knowing that the trade will end up with an unpaired status, or should we identify it using a client code to prevent any pairing tentative? So first of all, there is an additional field which is called reporting obligation for both counterparties. So this is first point. Always LEI. So from ESMA side, our guidance is always LEI has to be reported. There are some instances in which client codes are allowed, but if the entity is eligible for LEI, LEI should be reported. Then it is important to clarify in your feedback, your input in your response to the consultation paper, which are those instances when you can have entity which is registered within the EU, but it's not EU undertaking. So if it's only about AIF which are whose AIFM, whose management company AIFM is registered and subject to EU rules, those AIF should have LEI and they are subject to the reporting obligation. If these are other types of entities, please include them in your feedback so that we can duly assess which are those entities and how to proceed accordingly with them. In regards to reconciliation, if your counterparty submit action modification 2 times on that date, TRs will be used. The most recent modification on date, or you will not allow to submit 2 modifications at the same event date. Actually, more than 1 modification is allowed on a given date. This is something that we can further clarify to the TRs. The understanding is that the latest information is the most up to date, but since this could and might lead to further doubt on ESMA side, we are also happy to clarify that that additional instance when there are multiple reports with the same action type, which one should be taken for the purpose of the TSR. What are the applicable tolerance thresholds for the reconciliation evaluations? So you have them in the document that is published. As far and let me confirm, we have up to for delta we have up to 2nd digit after decimal. And for the valuation amount, it is again up to 2nd digit after decimal, with reconciliation starting 2 years from the start date of the reporting obligation under the new rules. As I have mentioned before, on reconciliation tolerances and validation rules, please provide us with your feedback and your input in the separate document. And now I have one question which was from the very start on reconciliation. Bear with me, I'm going to go to the top of the chat. So is there the possibility only with the reconciliation of new deals, postponing the reconciliation of outstanding to the end of transition period? Well, all the derivatives which are outstanding or even have been outstanding in the latest 30 days are subject to reconciliation as per the technical standard. Therefore, this is already indicated and provided at level 2. So the guidelines, as I mentioned, cannot alter that. It can be easier to focus on just few deals to improve reporting quality. Again, this is potentially is correct, but bear in mind that there is the transition period, and also we hope that giving 18 months to counterparties to prepare for the new requirements, it's plus 6 months to transition, should be enough to ensure that the data is reported accordingly. There is another question, which is for the valuation reconciliation. Would you reconcile based on the same valuation date? Well, indeed, might be a good element to include in principle. As I mentioned, for the valuation, the reference was that we have included in the consultation paper is to reconcile the latest data, and then the discussion was whether for all entities or only for those that it's applicable. However, indeed, further refinements of that aspect might be important. Therefore, I would indeed invite the feedback to be provided in this respect, because we understand it might indeed be more valuable to have some additional specification in that respect. Okay, I see last question. Given the wholesale changes to the reconciliation process, should TRs run the reconciliation process afresh on all eligible trades on the first day of the new technical standards? This would mean that EMIR Refit recon status at get drop. This is a very important question. It is important indeed to provide us with all the relevant situations where indeed there is a need for some additional clarifications. This is not something indeed some that. Sorry, I hear some background noises. Can you please mute your phone? On the question that is whether the wholesale, given the wholesale changes, we should only OTR should only focus on the all eligible trades for the first day. So indeed, the intention at the point in time is that the reconciliation process from the first day of the new rules is in accordance with the new rules, but any additional requirement for further changes or specifications or considerations how this could be better organized indeed are welcome, and indeed the consultation paper is the relevant forum to provide such such clarifications. I see there is one hand raised. Andrew Bailey.
Thank you, Nikolai. Yeah, Andrew Bailey is so just talking about the 2-year delay to some of the reconciliations, and that includes the valuation fields where there's a 2-year delay. Is the intention to use those 2 years to assess the requirements for reconciliation and the tolerance levels, or are those tolerance levels going to be set? So, for example, the valuations, you've got 2 years to look at data to ascertain whether the second number after the decimal place is a relevant tolerance level or not. So is that the intention for the 2-year delay?
It is both, Andrew. I would say on the one hand side, indeed, is for us to assess the correctness of the reporting and see the values that are being reported, and on the other hand, indeed, might be a good opportunity to further calibrate the reconciliation tolerances.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I see more questions now. QP, an issue on reconciliation relates to discrepancies in time schedule for life cycle events. Modification was said to be reported on effective date. Is this also the case for modification sent for early termination? Important element here, and I would also ask then Ioana to complement me if I miss some aspect here. We are suggesting here, or we are consulting, better said, on the reporting logic for the different life cycle events and the treatment by trade repositories of that reporting logic one way or another. So from that perspective, let's put it this way, at least at this point in time, the understanding is that reconciliation takes place the latest information as per the trade state that is being calculated by, or that is being calculated by the trade repositories, because there might be some submissions which are for the past and should not be taken into account for the trade state report. But indeed, if there is, we could still further consider what happens if there is an important difference between effective dates and how this could impact the reconciliation of data. Of course, the whole process of reconciliation, and in order to not further complicate it, is based on the fact that counterparties report timely all the details of their transactions, in that case of their derivatives. So if the latest reporting date is 2 days ago, but the counterparty, imagine we in the new, we are following the same SFTR approach, and the other counterparty has reported the same information 5 days ago, I don't see a big need to have to align the reporting date, and both have reported correctly, I mean. However, if we are in those situations, and again, this is with a lot of conditions, i.e. we're in situation of current SFTR reporting, there is a report which is late reported for something that happened 10 days ago, but it was not reported, then was not there was not restamped. Well, in that case, this is not going to be updated for the purposes of trade state. It's neither going to be updated for the purpose of reconciliation. No, so there it is important to to indeed understand all distances and follow that logic. That reconciliation is going to be based on the trade state, and we see a lot of dependencies also on the way in which trade state would be constructed by TRs. Therefore, indeed, it's important to have, when you provide us your feedback, to have a very clear understanding that the intention is to leverage on the trade state generated by the TRs, and as much as possible use it for reconciliation. Could you please clarify the meaning of the field further modifications in the reconciliation feedback? This is a field which is basically meant to underline whether, following the calculation of the latest reconciliation status for a derivative, there have been subsequent modifications that have been reported by the counterparties. Therefore, this might have led to subsequent modifications of the reconciliation status, i.e., if a derivative has further modifications, no, and it's not reconciled, the understanding is that the counterparties have not even tried to align the information. No, however, if the field further modifications is yes, and the reconciliation status is not reconciled, we might, as authorities, understand that such issue might be due to a most recent submission, which was either not correctly agreed between or not agreed between the counterparties, or might have not been adequately reported. No, so that is the meaning of that field, and indeed the intention is specifically from a supervisory perspective to use it. Of course, counterparties can make also use of that field to understand also how the other counterparty is reporting. Okay, I don't see more questions.
Nicola, I think we've reached the end of the session, correct?
We still have some time, Chris, if there are some other questions or also questions on topics which we have not covered today, but which might be relevant for the attendees to today's open hearing.
There's Andrew who has another question.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. This might be my last one. Just wanted to ask about complex trades within the consultation paper. It says there are elements of the complex trade which would not normally be in scope for EMIR reporting would be reportable if it's one of the components of a complex trade. Just wanted to clarify what that means, because we could be talking about a product such as a bond, and I'm not sure how you'd report that under EMIR, but that could be an element of a complex trade. So I just wanted to sort of get a bit, or if you can, give a bit more context as to what these non-eligible elements are for a complex trade.
Andrew, not necessarily right now, but maybe in the feedback, if you could refer to this specific part of the draft guidelines, because indeed, I don't think we plan on requiring reporting of bonds under EMIR. One thing that we wanted to say for sure is that if there are complex transactions where part of this package are derivatives and part are other types of products, we would still expect the complex trade component ID or package ID to be provided. So even if there is just one derivative that is being reported, but it's part of a complex package, this field should be populated to indicate that there is more background behind what we see in this single derivative report. But indeed, we would not expect non-derivatives to be reported under EMIR. So if this the confusion might be created by some part of the guidelines, please kindly flag to us indeed.
Okay, I think I understand. So if the derivative wouldn't be reportable for EMIR. Okay. Well, I'll include that in the response. Thank you, Joanna.
Thanks.
Are there any additional questions, comments, remarks, requests for clarifications?
There is one more, Chris, in the chat. Is there a link between MiFIR trading venue identifier, I guess, and EMIR report tracking number? Are these expected to be the same code? Asha, may I?
So the EMIR tracking number Report tracking number indeed should be the one assigned by the venue. So, and I would expect that this would be the same, but I don't want. Again, here we are not so much to provide the guidance today, and to members' recollection, we have not said anything specifically on this aspect in the draft guidelines. So. Once more, good point to be raised. We will further reflect on this, whether to specify further.
Thank you, Joanna. Are there any additional comments, remarks? I believe this has been quite a yes. There's someone who has raised his hand.
Sylvia from Registr.
Go ahead, Sergey.
Maybe a follow-up question on a previous question that was made around the reconciliation, the modification for the modification flag on reconciliation, which is basically if it is not the first time. So I don't know exactly how to understand it. Whether it is if it is the first time that you incorporate the record into the TDD, then you flag it as no. Otherwise, you flag it as yes, or if it is that if the record was reconciled at a certain point, then the next modification over that record, over that derivative, then you set the flag to yes. Is it the first or the second?
Sylvia, per se what you're saying, it's not contradicting each other, and indeed, the first time that you include the report derivative in the reconciliation report, there is no way to say that there have been further modifications to it. So in that case, indeed, it's going to be no. Then subsequently, the previous statuses are going to be assigned. What matters is for us to understand whether indeed from the last time where the derivative was included into the reconciliation process, there have been further modifications, i.e. lifecycle events reported to that derivative, so that then we can understand whether this might have an impact on the reconciliation status, on the rest of the elements which comprise the reconciliation status. So from that perspective, also, if you believe that there are some other elements, as we mentioned, that have to be clarified, also there, you remember that we have included a very comprehensive table with all the possible combinations in our view of the reconciliation statuses. So if there is, this is also another element that can be relevant from your perspective to be clarified or to further specified, or another combination which might be valid in your view, but we have not captured, please also let us know, so that indeed this aspect is duly reflected in the guidance.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolai. Are there any additional comments, remarks? Yes, Bartosz. Yes, Bartosz.
Bartosz Jagodzinski. Hello.
Bartosz, we can't hear you. So
sorry, I was muted. Sorry, I'm here. Thank you. I'm sorry. Just a question on intra-group reporting exemption. Do you think it would be possible to provide certain clarification in the guidelines on the matter regarding intra-group reporting exemption? It was already actually considered and consulted in the Q&A and then the recent consultation from European Commission. But actually, in our case, I am sure it's not the time now here to provide the whole explanation of our case, but we think it still needs some clarification on what is a parent entity and ultimate parent entity in case there are various structures of the non-financial groups. We, of course, will provide a detailed explanation what exactly our case is and how we believe it should be interpreted under the guidelines and under the EMIR Refit.
Thank you. Indeed, we're going to be very eager to receive your feedback. bear in mind that indeed also the guidelines we have incorporated some of the existing Q&As, but since the guidelines, ESMA guidelines, and this particular Q&A specifically with regards to parent undertaking is a Q&A which was issued by the Commission. It was incorporated in the document for obvious reasons, as you know, but it's a Q&A from the Commission. Therefore, specifically in that regard, we don't plan to include it further. But if there are some other instances where indeed clarification might be provided by ESMA, i.e. the clarification provided is in the scope of ESMA, we're going to be indeed happy to do it. Otherwise, we would reflect on this and potentially further discuss with the colleagues in the European Commission how to better address your query.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to make a comment or remark? We still have some time. Bartosz, do you have additional comments? All right, there's a question from Adam. Nikolai.
Yes. What is the reason for the CFI code being required when an ISIN is reported?
Maybe I can take this one. Indeed, this is flagged in the final report on the technical standards, more in the context of the UPI. Nevertheless, we are planning to require all the reportable details, including also certain attributes of the financial instruments in the beginning of the reporting. In the future, this approach might be reassessed, especially for the UPI reference data once the UPI system is fully in place and all the market participants and also the regulators have gained more experience with using the UPI system. At the same time, to manage expectations, there are certain fields that are very key to the analysis of the derivatives by the data users at the authorities. And those fields could be, for instance, asset class or product type, but also the CFI providing in a very clear way basic information about the instrument. Indeed, while we understand that for those products that are or will be in the future identified with ISIN, CFI can be retrieved. This is one of those most basic informations that allow for easy use of the derivative data.
Thank you, Joanna. There's a question from Valerio and another one from Andreas. I think the question from Valerio has already been addressed, correct, Nikolai?
There are some examples indeed included in the guidelines, but it's also going to be important from that perspective to know what other instances might be relevant for counterparties, what in particular bothers with regards to reporting of exchange traded derivatives and in which cases. So indeed we can better understand it. And in that regard, if I can even abuse the input, definitely we're going to be grateful if you suggest some structure of the example that you need. Therefore, we can then reflect on our side how to better represent it. And Asha, the last one on the UPI, probably you.
I can take it.
Yeah.
Just read out for everyone. The reporting participants, how will access UPIs? Will it be something similar to fields? So just to recall, the UPI is the globally agreed standard for the unique identification of the products. The FSB has decided that DSB will be the unique UPI service provider. So you may go also to the UPI, to the DSB website for very detailed information on many aspects. It's already available there. In very short, everyone would be able to connect to the DSB services. For those market participants that would not need to create their own UPIs, that would not need to request UPIs, but just to retrieve and to verify what is the UPI for a given product. There are also some options of connecting free of charge. For the let's say less frequent trading in the derivatives.
Thank you, Joanna. Are there any additional comments, questions? Okay. So first of all, thank you very much, Nikolai and Joanna, for delivering this presentation to the industry. I hope the industry has found the open hearing useful. We definitely have found your questions and your comments helpful, and we look forward to receiving your detailed feedback by the 30th September. Any additional points, Nikolai, Joanna, from your end? No. So thank you very much once again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.